Oh, I feel like I'm going to fall off.
These chairs are.
So,
No.
I'm super glad that we've got this session coming in. It's battling barriers and building bridges for pathway to our inclusive industry. And I'm going to pass over to Sharon Lloyd-Barnes, Commercial Director and Inclusion Lead at the Advertising Association. Association, there we go, to introduce her panel. A huge round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. It's for your feedback. Is that me? No. Morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. In fact, afternoon now. Is that feedback? No, I'm going to go with it.
I think so.
Delighted to be here today and talk a bit about All In, the work that we're doing. Also delighted to have Sue and Jerry here with me today. So Jerry is Head of Media at Beam Suntory, including brands like Jim Beam and Suntory Whiskey. And Sue Karki is Marketing Chapter Lead at Direct Line Group, which includes Churchill and Green Flag, as well as Direct Line. And I've just got a little bit of background for both of them, including their sort of diversity credentials, if you like. So Jerry is WFA Global Diversity Ambassador, obviously working globally with them, Advertising Board, Conscious Advertising Network Board, and of course an integral member of our All In working group at the Advertising Association. And Sue, you've been at Direct Line for 20 years, which I can't believe looking at you, over 20 years. And you're also on the ISBAR TV steering group and in their diversity advisory group as well. So little known facts about both of you. You carried the Olympic torch on a Cadbury's shoot, and you have shaken Harvey Keitel's hand during a shoot. So more maybe to chat about in the green room afterwards. But we're here.
Those facts ask more questions than they answer.
Yeah, exactly. They've sort of teed up a chat over coffee and lunch, I think. But yeah, we're here to talk about the All In campaign, the longer-term campaign, which is an industry-wide initiative to ensure that everyone in UK advertising feels they belong. And it kicked off this time last year with a census, the All In census, where we created a sort of stop the clock moment, if you like, on March the 10th. We had over 16,000 responses from across the industry, including brands, agencies, media owners, tech platforms, production companies. And we know that it's the largest, it was the first ever survey we've done for the industry. But we also now know that it's the biggest piece of work across any sort of comparable industry in the UK. So that's really exciting. It sort of kicked off this huge initiative. And we also estimate that because we had industry leaders engaging in this and sort of cascading it down to their teams on the day, we've equated that, I think, quite conservatively to £500,000 worth of industry time. So there's really been a huge investment in getting behind what everyone sees as a really important piece of work. What it's prompted, before I come to the panel, is an action plan. It's probably the most important part of the work. We launched just 3 actions in the summer last year when we launched the findings. And they were really what the data shaped, so that they were kind of the most shocking statistics, if you like, shaped the first 3 actions. And then earlier this year, we launched another 3 at our industry summit. And it's important to flag that this is an industry-wide initiative with ISBAR, the IPA, and AA, so that we do have that reach across every corner, as a famous ad used to once say. So coming on, I'm just going to leave this slide on in the background so that everyone can kind of reference it and we can chat around it. But to date, these are the 6 groups that we have developed actions for. We haven't put the actions up there. I can give you a link at the end so that you can have a look in your own time. But these were the key themes that came out, and there's just one kind of killer stat, I guess, that goes with each, just to give you that sense. But Jerry, coming to you, I mean, obviously you've been part of this work since the very beginning. What struck you most about the findings, and did they kind of reflect what you expected?
Yeah, I think the 16,000 struck me a lot. I think it's a fantastic number of people we got to do it, and then the WFA repeated something somewhat similar globally. And without raining on their parade, I think we kind of got more people in the UK to do it than kind of the rest of the world did combined. And I think that was a positive thing, and that kind of showed that, at least we're thinking about this, caring about it. People are taking the time to try and do something. I think most of the numbers didn't shock or surprise me. We have a challenge with diversity in industry, let's be honest, across a whole range of different numbers, those 6, and there are other areas we're still coming to in the plan. you know, we're not perfect. I have tucked away in some of the conversation we have, I think there was a comment from Kantar who helped with it, that actually compared to some other industries, you know, we're not terrible, we're moving in the right direction, you know, so we shouldn't completely beat ourselves up. What I actually really found interesting, and a few of the stats are up here, is that I love that the data goes one step beyond just like, are some of these people in the room? It's like, are people with different backgrounds, different experiences, different ways of thinking, happy in our industry, comfortable in our industry, wanting to stay in our industry, thinking that they can progress in our industry. And I think that's where it's uncomfortable to read, like some of the stats, you know, 1 in 3 of our black colleagues don't think they belong in our industry. 27% of Asians think they're likely to leave. It was the same with the LGBTQ stats, where I think, you know, actually kind of top line representation isn't that bad. It's kind of possibly even close to parity with where we think the country is. But actually, you know, people's perceptions of whether they were comfortable, whether they were happy, whether they could be them full selves at work, etc., was a challenge. And I think that's the great thing about the census, is it's pushing us to go a little bit deeper, because of course there's a job to be done to get more people in. And you know, I think it's great that we've looked at social economic groups, because I think that's something I'm very posh myself, but it's something that it's important that we think about. But it's actually not just like getting people in the door, is it? It's like how they actually want to stay, how we actually make it an industry that feels like a place where they want to be, and hopefully where they can look at the top of businesses and see, yes, I can get to the top of the business because there are people like me there, which is where I think we do have quite a long way to go, perhaps. Yeah,
absolutely. And Sue, I mean, why is this important for you at Direct Line Group, and particularly around data, just sort of picking up on what Jerry said about the importance of data?
Yeah, I sort of wholeheartedly agree with what Jerry's just said. I think data is super important. We need to be able to look at where we are, to be able to understand how we're progressing, and how we also need it so that we have a representation, an understanding of our organisation. Because if you don't know, you don't know. How are you going to actually inform decent action plans and drive change? So I think those things are super important at an overall sort of corporate level. I think for me, what I found really interesting when we looked at some of the internal data that we had at Direct Line is the verbatims, because the numbers are the numbers, and obviously some of them are super uncomfortable, but I think if you have an opportunity to actually look at the verbatims, it's really powerful and impactful, because it's really emotional. I think that really resonates, because if you're part of the majority, you don't necessarily understand what that means as an individual. And I think if you then look at the actual verbatims, that for me was a moment where you think, wow, that actually, you can relate to that, because you can really understand it.
Yeah, it brings it to life, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's worth, in the next iteration, we're going to be doing the census every 2 years, so we're doing it again in March next year. We are including verbatim in that, just to get a richer sense of, to put the kind of colour, I guess, behind why 30% or 32% of black talent say they are likely to leave the industry in the next 2 years. We need to get more on why that is. And it's worth flagging that within the census, it was sort of 2/3 of how we all identify. You may remember doing it yourself, some of you, but the last section was about how we feel about where we work based on how we've identified. So if you've been, even sort of behaviours within the workplace, like being talked over, and so we've got that data now. When it comes to the action plan, Jerry, are there specific barriers that you've seen or you've heard about, and any suggestions on how to overcome those?
Well, I love that the action plan is specific. I think we had a bit of a debate when we were, well, not even a debate, but discussion, like when we started knowing this was coming, we were going to have the census. It's kind of like you want to solve everything. I think the trouble is that when you try and solve everything, you get close to solving nothing. You say like nice platitudes about, everyone should be included. Isn't that wonderful? And I think kind of the great thing about the action plan, and a lot of these have been informed by working with kind of different like voluntary organisations within the industry that kind of know those communities, know those challenges. So for instance, like there was debate is the wrong word, but like with the black talent one, people were like, well, why black talent? There are lots of other ethnic minorities and things in our industry, Asian talent, a whole range of things, people have different needs, people have different experiences, people have very different cultures, and when we kind of say everyone's, BAME or something, it loses that. And that's why I think there's a great initiative like this, the Black Representation in Marketing initiative, which I know is kind of also to do with how we represent people externally and how we put them in our adverts and things. I think that kind of specificity is good. I also think there are certain parts of diversity. I think like class is a good example, age is an example. I think we still need to come to it, but like mental health and different neurodiversity and things are areas where even those of us who spend lots of our time talking about diversity get a little bit squirmish. We don't always know the right language to say. We don't know kind of how to, talk about class without sounding like offensive and things. So I think it's great that we have built action plans and we have been quite specific about that. And all these have, there are these, for all of these sections, there's a headline key action. But actually, if you dig in on the all-in site, there's kind of several subsequent actions and several different things that we can take. And in total, that adds up to a lot of things for us all to do. But I think at a corporate level, that's why it's great to have start with this top action. Start here, do that.
Yeah.
And I think there's also at an individual level, even if in your own business you don't think you have the right to kind of define the overall business approach, quite a lot of those actions are small things that individuals can do, that individuals can kind of, or in your own team, or in your own little bubble, or in your own little part of the industry, you can start making that change as well. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Sue, same question to you, I guess, just across the sort of 6 groups that we've pulled out so far from the data. Any sort of barriers that you've witnessed and potential solutions?
I think it's interesting that when it's grouped up like that overall, and I think it's important that it is grouped up like that so that we can actually have an action plan and drive change. But I think it's also worth remembering that individuals are potentially a combination of many of those as well. It's not just I, for example, wouldn't just fall under women or Asian, for example. You're sort of a combination of both. So I think it's just also remembering that it's not sort of siloed into sort of buckets. But I completely understand to actually drive change and action, it's easier to sort of do it that way. I think for me, from a direct, I think one of the things that's super important is you need genuine buy-in from the top, because you need that to be able to sort of have action plans from the top and sort of bottom up approach. I think one of the things from Direct Line Group is really great that is part of our strategic initiative. So we've got great people as one of our strategic initiatives, and a value that's bringing all yourself to work. So we should be able to sort of, include, celebrate difference and be really inclusive. And I guess you could argue, okay, that's our corporate line, and is that what it is? But I mean, genuinely, we've got a marketing director, Mark Evans, who's also part of the board, and he genuinely is striving for change, and it's really, really good to see. I think that's really important. But I think the point that Joey is making in terms of going out and understanding, educating yourself, or even senior leaders, is really important. So one of the things that we've done over the last few years is introduce a reverse mentoring scheme. And that's great for a number of different reasons, and probably haven't got a huge amount of time to sort of go into the detail of that. But I think a couple of things to call out there is, if you're unaware of things, reverse mentoring group gives the opportunity, where people are paired up from a senior leadership team for also individuals that are representing the diverse groups, and can educate, and you're sort of educating on that one-to-one basis. So it's great for this senior leader because they haven't necessarily experienced that, but also it's great for the mentor as such in the reverse mentoring scheme, because it gives them access to someone that they may not necessarily have, and can also be sort of a champion for them. So it's a win-win. I'm not suggesting we've got it completely right and it's all there, but I think it's just sort of having initiatives like that. And I also think, in terms of the barriers, from my perspective, it's making sure that in your organisation there are role models. Because if you then have all these initiatives and you're there working, and actually you don't necessarily see where you can sort of see the diverse representation of the various groups, then you potentially could question it. I mean, for us, I think a few years back, if you look at our board, it was pretty much all men and white. And it's great, over the last year and a half or so, we've got, potentially longer, COVID always takes time out, we've got a female chair, CEO, our board now is more female than it is male, and we've got a couple of representations from sort of ethnic minority group as well. So that, I think, not suggesting that we've got it right, but I think if that then is driven by the top, it's really helpful to be able to sort of drive change and have that action plan on board.
Absolutely.
I love the reverse mentoring thing, just taking a bit of time to understand other people's perspective, I think is brilliant. And I know Bloom, for instance, they obviously do a lot to support women in the industry. At the moment, they do the Bloom Exchange thing, which is for men to spend time talking to women. And I did it last year. It was actually fantastic. I think it's open for applications at the moment, men in the room, so you should do it. And it really was eye-opening. I mean, I think we actually both took something out of it and learnt and developed and things, but, you know, there are, like, stupid things that, you know, women in our industry, you know, like, one day she showed me her LinkedIn inbox, like, just kind of the ridiculous, like, I mean, we all get spam in our LinkedIn inbox, but mine is, like, come and have a meeting with me, and hers is, like, can we go for dinner and have drinks, and you're beautiful and things like that. And, you know, it's just, yeah, like, it's good to understand some of the crap that different people from different backgrounds that are facing in our industry.
Well, that brings me on, it's a really good segue into the next question about, as individuals, what can we do? Because obviously inclusion is all about, it means union and integration. It's the opposite of exclusion. I think by default, as individuals, we've all got a part to play in that. So what does that mean for both of you in terms of part to play and what people can do themselves?
Well, I think firstly, right, we're in it together. I think we should all try to sort of help each other. So what can we share, and what learnings do we have? I mean, you know, we've got a number of different sort of initiatives, obviously, with what we're talking about today. We've got ISBAR, there's WACL, there's a number of different sort of initiatives that you can join to share your thoughts or actually educate yourself, because you'll learn if that's the opportunity. There's opportunities there to do that. I think, you know, one of the things that, and then we can help each other as an industry overall. One of the things that I found, to bring it to life a little bit, I guess, as part of one of the ISBAR working groups, was that we had a really good discussion a few weeks ago around D&I, and you're talking to other advertisers there, and you're bouncing off sort of ideas and able to share. So normally we don't necessarily share sort of details if you're talking about obviously our campaigns and things like that, but this was great because you can then sort of bounce off ideas, what are we doing, what's working and what's not. So I found that really helpful, and, you know, brings things to life a little bit more. So I think that's definitely one of the things. I think the other thing which I personally think is really positive, so we haven't necessarily talked about sort of recruitment or unconscious bias, which I'm pretty sure, you know, most of the people in the room here would be aware of. But one of the things that I think is super important is how do we sort of look at different recruitment opportunities. So we go down the most of us would go down the sort of traditional route. So one of the things that I think is really interesting that DLG have signed up to is the 5% Club. So we look at apprenticeships and trying to give an opportunity for those people that, for anyone, but for those particular people that probably resonate more, making it more appealing to get into our industry, and how do we do that in a way where they may not necessarily have the experience or the sort of network to be able to do that, or may not necessarily even be a graduate. So, you know, we've got a number of different apprentices within sort of DLG and within marketing as well. We've got some great ones. One of them actually is sitting in the room here today. So it's a really good opportunity. So I'd sort of suggest that, you know, if any of you are involved in sort of recruitment or can have that discussions, and, you know, please have those discussions. And I guess the final point that I'd like to make on that at an individual level is, you know what, if you witness something or you see something that's not right, call it out or ask the individual, because being a bystander isn't right, because that is being part of the problem. So I think between more strategic things and sort of daily things, I think there's a number of different things that we can do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I love that active bystander piece, because I think that came out loud and clear.
Yeah.
You know, the big takeaway from the data, and the findings are all available on our website, which I'll share in a minute, but is that, you know, recruitment-wise, we're doing okay. There's lots of room for improvement across certain groups, but the big issue is retention. And there's lots of factors that play with the pandemic and people having different lifestyle choices, I know. But I think that calling things out when you experience people not being treated as well as they should be is, and it's not necessarily sort of abusive behaviour, it's just being excluded from meetings or talked over in meetings. So any more to add on that, Jerry?
No, I mean, that's probably what I'd say, and I think I hinted at it earlier, but it can feel like, you know, I want to change the diversity and inclusion of like an entire industry, and also frankly an entire country and an entire world and society. Feels like quite a difficult task for any of us to undertake, and it would be easy to, like, you know, walk away from it. But it's exactly that. It's thinking about your circle of influence, and, you know, we all have a circle of influence. We all, you know, if you're a team leader, or even if you're like the most day one of your job, you still have an influence. You still have people you work with, how you treat them, how we act to them. And I think there are very small things you can do, especially as a boss, or if you're running a call or something about it, being conscious of who's speaking, who's not, being conscious of who's getting a chance to have their views shared, who's not, conscious of like, is it always the same people putting their hands up to do projects and do things, and other people who perhaps should definitely get the chance, and I just, I work in a global business. I'm really conscious of people where English isn't their first language, and trying to allow time and space and find inclusive ways of doing that. And as a boss, I also personally I try and role model being quite open, and I'm a gay man, so I casually mention things about my boyfriend. He's now my fiance, so yes. I have to specifically
big
say.
Big wedding this year.
I have to say my fiance Paul to try and do that. But it'll be easier when it's my husband. It'll be fine again. But things like that. I mean, even when I joined Beam Suntory, I used to work at GSK, and it's a new company and things. And when I first met with my team, I said, this is a really important thing to me. And I also, I know we're exploring flexible work and things like that, but absolutely, I really believe in that. I think, if you ever need to leave early to look after kids, to look after family, to balance whatever's going on in your life, that's really important to me that you can do that. And some of that stuff is kind of becoming part of our life anyway. But I think just telling people that you think that stuff's important, that you think, modeling it in yourself. And then it goes up a level, if you are a senior leader, if you're responsible for kind of policy and approaches and things in your business, and there's obviously more you can potentially do, and the more you should do. And it's not just because it's a nice, fluffy, lovely thing to do. If you want to have competitive advantage and deliver best results, especially in marketing, where our whole industry is about reflecting consumers, trying to talk to people who are very different to pretty much all of us in this room, it's a competitive advantage. And then there is that kind of bigger things, and there are lots of industry initiatives. And I think if you're really passionate about it, and frankly, thank you for coming, because there are other places you could be, and it's great that you guys cared enough to come. There are definitely initiatives you can get into, and quite a lot of the Brixton Finishing School, which I think is supported in some way and connected in some way by the conference today, is a really fantastic organisation, and Ali there doing a great job to get people from very different backgrounds into the business. And so I don't have to set up Brixton Finishing School. I just have to see how can I support that? How can I help? GSK, where I used to work, supported them. We took apprenticeships and things like that. So find out for the really big stuff. Find out some of the other initiatives out there, advertising, media for all. There's loads of really great initiatives. But if you want to have a slightly bigger impact, you can help an organisation that's doing that rather than having to start from scratch.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, in line with the topic of this theme, can't speak now, this session today, it's about, battling the barriers that there are. And I think that was the whole point of this work at the very beginning, was to try and pull together. I mean, I think initially we were just going to have a showcase of all the initiatives like Brixton, Finishing School, Creative Equals on our website. And we then decided we actually did need to find out, to your point, Sue, who works in the industry and how they feel about it. And the win for this ultimately is we create a workforce that attracts more great talent, keeps the talent we've got, and then our work will inevitably be more sort of authentically diverse. So it is win-win-win. I think we didn't flag the fact that all the actions today have been created by people with lived experience, and we approached the pressure groups, some of whom you've mentioned today, like advertising, MIFA, Media for All, to help us work on it. That's really important, obviously, for it to be authentic. From a brand marketing point of view, obviously we've tried to create a sort of framework. That's what the action plan is. How easy is it for brand teams to sort of lift that and implement it in their businesses? So we've seen it working in agencies. I'll come on to talk about the All-in Champion status, but from a sort of day-to-day point of view, is it useful?
It's definitely useful.
What are the barriers?
I think there's, some of this stuff is hard stuff to change and drive. But I think it's easy as a brand to be here being we want our agencies to be better at this stuff, and we're going to put it in our RFPs, and we're going to demand it of you. But we obviously need to look at our own houses as well. And brands can be the worst, especially in terms of recruitment and things. You sort of hinted at it. I think places I work, we have very traditional recruitment things. We want people with good degrees from good universities, and very stuff all of which brings with it narrowness and bias, because various people are excluded from those spaces to begin with. I think we really need to challenge ourselves on that. I think it can be overwhelming. We've got 6 things on the screen, each which has lots of things under them. So I think it is important to prioritise 1 or 2 where you start to look at the key actions, but then to fast follow, because some of the key actions on a lot of these things are relatively simple to do. I think some of the stuff around, I don't know, even on disability in terms of just like, there are ridiculous things like, obviously is your office accessible at all, but actually is your website accessible? Like, can people even apply for your jobs? Can people even see and understand your jobs? So I think, yeah, it's obviously a big thing to solve for, but any big thing you solve for, you start with small actions. I think that's why it's useful to have small actions to start. And even if you know, there can be strategic reasons to pick one of these, or you could like throw a dart and pick one of them and just say, I've got to start somewhere. So rather than like panicking and not knowing what to start, I'm going to start and focus on a couple of these things, and then hopefully work through. And they all, I mean, there is a lot of intersectionality, isn't there? Although there are specific challenges, every step you take to make your office more welcoming, more inclusive to any group makes it more inclusive to every group, which includes white, straight, middle-class men. You know, we're trying to build an inclusive office where everyone is welcome, and although people have specific needs and specific challenges, it all helps. Absolutely.
I mean, that's what fell out of the inclusive design session earlier on today. It's exactly that. When you design something for blind people or wheelchair users, it actually benefits everybody. So a same point, I suppose, in terms of you know, barriers, and because that's a fundamental part of this work, is to try and create an initiative where everyone in the industry doing the same few things surely has to drive some sort of change. Do you agree with Jerry on that point about just picking out a couple that you can implement and adopt now in your business?
I think it's...
You can disagree.
No, I don't. As I said, as we talked about earlier on in terms of the importance of data, I think, you know, it's not as if any of these streams reflect one individual per se. It could be a sort of combination, but in order to, what we need to do is drive change, and in order to drive change, you need a sort of clear action plan. So if this then makes it easier to drive that action plan, it means that whilst you have an initiative for one group, it doesn't mean that won't help another, because ultimately all of this, I think the key thing, like if one of the elements that we talked about earlier was like, how do we ensure that everyone has a voice on the table? So to make sure that people have that psychological safety, because then they can sort of talk up. I think that's really important. So it's also on, which doesn't necessarily fall on one sort of group, but like, can we, I don't know, in meetings, for example, you know, it's not if something is an idea that you feel as if is a no-brainer, but actually there's individuals in there that don't speak up. Maybe, you know, just say, well, what's good about this and what's not. So it also gives the opportunity for individuals to speak up. So it is smaller steps, and it's not necessarily sort of strategic, but I think those things would, you know, drive change. I mean, this isn't going to be, none of this is going to be overnight. So it's sort of it's
baby steps, isn't it?
Baby steps.
Yeah. Well, in wrapping up, we've been really encouraged by industry engagement. I mean, most of the key stakeholders, all the agency groups have lent into it, big tech platforms, etc. And we've launched the All-in Champion status, which is sort of being announced, the first list of businesses that have supported that, being announced at a parliamentary reception in June. So that's really encouraging. I think people have seen it as a you know, even to retrofit the brilliant work they're already doing against a framework. So if you want to find out more about that, we'd love everybody in the room to sort of take part. And essentially, it's being a champion to support the work and say we're in it for the long haul. It's not we've achieved everything tick, which I think is important to stress. But there is time for a question or two if anyone has any. Can't quite see. Just I think there's a mic coming down, isn't there? Thank you.
Hiya, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hiya, I'm Maggie. Thank you for your talk today. I'm going to be cheeky. I have two questions. How come on the 6 groups that was on the screen earlier, there wasn't an LGBT group? And for the reverse mentoring, are you only learning from the young people you're speaking to, or are you also considering to recruit them, which could be also considered like a different method of recruitment?
I can speak to the first one. So there are probably a number of other groups you could think of that aren't listed, and that's partly because originally when we first launched the action plan there were 3, now there's 6, and there's 9 to come. And so the LGBT one is a work in progress. We've been working with Advertising, which is an organisation industry where I also volunteer. They were close to being one of the next 3, but actually they were still getting, well, we were still getting our ducks in a row about exactly what we wanted to ask for, and I think therefore they probably are in the
June, next month.
But yeah, it's a good challenge that they're, you know. One of the downsides of picking certain places to start is you obviously pick places where you don't, and that is coming, and they've got some great steps that we can take around everything from small things around like pronouns and things through to like policies and things you can have. So that is definitely coming on the
in the next few
mentorship,
weeks.
Yeah.
So on the reverse mentor, was your question, I didn't quite hear it, was your question around, is it just a one-way trying to educate?
Is it like you are taking information from people, or are you also like
All right, so it's happening, so they're already part of the organisation, so it's giving them access to senior leaders, and they can then be their champions too. But for senior leaders, it's bringing to life, I guess, some of these numbers and the impact and the sort of journey that those individuals have gone on.
I think wider industry, there are some at the beginnings. So I think advertising. I think Bloom also has a mentorship scheme which encourages people who are either new or very junior to the industry to join as well. So it between multiple companies, tries to do that kind of helping new people join as well. But yeah, I guess within your own company, it's.
But then it's about progression and making sure that individuals' voices are heard where they haven't potentially historically may not have had that opportunity. So particularly for large organisations, we've got over 10,000 employees. So how do you ensure that relevant people have the access? So it's not as if our senior leadership isn't accessible, but it's a little bit harder when you've got quite different sort of structures, teams across the board.
I can see Sam over there, so I'm going to say thank you so much to everyone for sitting and listening to us. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Sue. And
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for all your support on All In as well. Thank you. Thank you.